First, I would like to welcome Dr. Gina Ligon from UNO from the NCITE Center. Dr. Ligon received her PhD in industrial and organizational psychology and a minor in quantitative psychology from the University of Oklahoma, Boomer. Sorry, I had to do that for my parents. Prior to coming to UNO, she was a full-time faculty member at Villanova University in the graduate programs in HR development. She also worked as the director of performance consulting at St. Louis-based Psychological Associates. Her research program focuses on the identification and development of high-level talent. She has a specific expertise in innovation and leadership and has published over 70 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters on the subject. Next, we have Dan Feferman joining us from Israel, from Rehovot. Many of you know Dan. He is an Israeli-American author, speaker, researcher, and thought leader who focuses on Israel, the Jewish world, and the Middle East. He publishes and speaks regularly in Israel and around the world. After serving as an advisor on national security matters in the IDF, Feferman was a fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, and he co-founded the Gulf Israel Policy Forum before joining the Sharaka. Then we have Dr. Khuzaie joining us from Bahrain. Dr. Khuzaie is a Bahrain-based political analyst and author with cross-industry experience ranging from managing regional marketing campaigns with international names like HBSC Bank. Prior to his current post, he led several political initiatives and campaigns worldwide. Among his books are Kingdom of Bahrain, Political Review, and an upcoming book on the history of Iran-Bahrain relations. He holds a PhD in international relations. Finally, we have our moderator, Erin Grace. Erin is a former journalist who spent 2 decades in various reporting and columnist roles at Nebraska's largest newspaper, the Omaha World Herald. She broke news, conducted investigations, and captured the everyday life of Omahans and communities and stories. She also is a former high school English teacher who Teach for America. Erin leads NCITE's communications team and coordinates outreach efforts to external partners and the public. She serves as NCITE's translator, and in doing so, she takes the research that they are doing to broad audiences to build support for NCITE's work and build resilience within our community. Once again, thank you all for being here, and take it away, Erin.
Hey, everybody, welcome, and thank you to the Jewish Federation for this invitation to talk to you today about a really tough subject, right? So thanks for being here. I just want to let you know how it's going to go. Each of our panelists will get about 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll do some Q&A. We've got some prepared questions, and I'll try my best to get your questions from the audience. Chances are we're not going to solve it all today. We'll get to all the questions. But please let me know how I can answer your questions about NCITE or what I can do after this. I've also got some handouts from our organization. So the first person we'd like to hear from is Dan Feferman. And this is not Dan Feferman. Can you mute? No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we are.
Here we go. Okay.
Dan, take it away. Thank you.
All right. Hi everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces here in this crowd. Of course, I am the son-in-law of the Taxmans, who might be on this call right now. And I now run a wonderful project together here with my partner Ahmed, who you'll meet soon, called Sharaka. We are a Middle East-based NGO that is trying our best, including in these very dark times, to build bridges of dialogue and cooperation in and around the Middle East, with a focus on educating the publics around the Middle East and many of those hostile to the idea of Israel, or even Jews in the West, about Israel and the Jewish people, through education, dialogue, and eventually cooperation. We believe that we can lead to a more productive future, and we're based on the vision of the Abraham Accords. I was asked to talk about 3 kind of main points here tonight in a very short time, and I'll do my best here. First, what is Hamas? When was it founded, and why was it founded? Hamas is it's an acronym in Arabic that stands for the Islamic Resistance Movement, Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, and it was founded in the late 1980s as the Palestinian offshoot, the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a worldwide fundamentalist Islamist organization that, if I dumb it down for us here in just 10 seconds, basically says that if Muslim societies return to strict fundamentalist, maybe we'll call it even puritanical interpretations of Islam, and that those interpretations govern all of society, no such thing as a secular society or a secular legal system, then everything will be good and everything will be okay. Basically, that's what it says. It exists all over the Middle East, all over the Muslim world, and many of the loud voices around the West, including in the United States where you live, are either Muslim Brotherhood or connected to Muslim Brotherhood. Ahmed can also talk about that. CARE, for example, is one of these organizations. In some places, they're a little more moderate and realistic. In other places, like in Gaza, of course, they're very much fundamentalists. So they were established. They rose as a popular movement in the Gaza Strip, in the Palestinian territories, in the late 1980s, in the midst of the first Intifada, the first uprising against Israel. Originally as a counter to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and in their 1988 charter, they would call very explicitly for the destruction of Israel, the killing of all Israelis, all Jews, with quotes from various Islamic sources that even say, and then the rocks in the trees will cry out to us, there's a Jew hiding behind us, come and kill them. And the establishment of an Islamic society in all of historic Palestine. So they are not interested, nor have they ever been, in a two-state solution. When they talk about occupation, they're not talking about West Bank and Gaza in 1967. They are very much referring to all of Israel, all of 1948. And they hold by a very fundamentalist and aggressive interpretation that many Arab Muslims have held throughout history. This is, once a land has been conquered by Islam, it will forever be Muslim. In 2017, they updated their charter, changing Jew to Zionist and changing kill to using all means necessary. But the idea was still there. It turns out, as we found out just 4 weeks ago, that this was a farce. In the 1990s, as the Oslo peace process began, Hamas introduced to Israel, maybe to the world, suicide bombings. And by 1997, they were the leading terror organization, resistance organization, whatever you want to call them, designated in 1997 by the United States as a foreign terrorist organization. Its makeup is very sophisticated. It has both a military and a political wings. Its top leadership right now is a man named Ismail Haniyeh, who is hiding out in a 7-star hotel in Qatar. They have a Shura Council, kind of like a rabbinical board, that makes the Islamic interpretations. They have West Bank and Gaza heads. If you'll hear in the news, the name Yahya Sinwar is the head of Hamas in Gaza. Someone named Saleh El-Aruri is in the West Bank. And of course, they have a military commander right now. It's someone named Mohammed Deif, who's considered a ghost and is apparently very, very hard to track down. Formerly the head of their political affairs, Khalid Mashal, is heading diaspora affairs, also sitting in Qatar. And they have a very clear structure. Everyone answers to the top leadership. There's a military, there's a social welfare branch, which is how they initially got a lot of their popularity, because the PLO, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, was seen as incredibly corrupt, and they presented themselves as very much looking after the needs of the people. Of course, as Ahmed can attest to, this is one of the playbooks that fundamentalist Islamic organizations use, at least in the early stages, is to be the provider of social welfare services that the traditional governments, who are often corrupt or inept, cannot provide. And they also have factions not just in the Palestinian territories, of course, also in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, but also in Lebanon. And a lot of the rockets coming out of South Lebanon come from Hamas factions that are sitting there working together with Hezbollah. A little bit of quick history. In 2005, recall, Israel had disengaged. Israel decided under then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to totally disengage from the Gaza Strip. In 2006, the Palestinian Authority held elections, and Hamas won the parliamentary elections, beating out Fatah, beating out the PLO, and then immediately instituted.
Exercise in the morning at 10.
Or if someone could mute that.
Somebody would have to be here by 9.
That conversation that's overriding me.
Just interrupt for a second. All of those viewing online, please make sure you are muted.
We'll see what we can do, okay? Okay, you can call.
Especially Margot.
Yeah.
2006, Hamas won a popular election. Again, the Fatah, the PLO, was perceived as corrupt, and they beat them in a popular election in the Palestinian parliament. And then in 2006 and 2007, they launched a very, very brutal and bloody coup d'etat against PLO leadership in the Gaza Strip over the course of a year, killing in brutal manners, similar to the gruesome things that we saw, what they did to the 1,400 Israelis on the morning of October 7th. Some 800 Palestinian from the Fatah faction, the ruling kind of bureaucracy and security leadership in Gaza. And since 2007, they have controlled Gaza with an iron fist. They have imposed their radical interpretation of Islam on all Gazans. And numerous times now, 6 times, 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012, 2014, and a few other smaller rounds since then, and of course this recent one, have dragged the Gaza Strip into increasingly violent exchanges with Israel. They have they instituted rocket, first mortars and then rockets. They dug tunnels as Israel introduced more and more increasingly sophisticated technological answers to these challenges. They actually went low tech. At one point, they were launching balloons with incendiary bombs over the fence in Gaza. They burned tires and threw stones and tried to mask that to shoot at Israeli soldiers on the other side. Or from time to time would put snipers on the Gaza side and shoot at the Israeli side. And I'll get to why in a second if that's not clear yet. I want to say a word about their funding because this is an important one. So on the one hand, they are very much a terrorist organization and they get a lot of funding, around $100 million, maybe more a year from Iran, the biggest state funder of terrorism in the region. The political branch of Hamas receives a similar amount, around $30 million in cash every month from Qatar, who is one of the biggest backers of political fundamentalist Islam in the region. There are reports that Turkey may also be indirectly funding them. They tax the smuggling that comes in from Egypt. They tax the workers. They tax the payments that come in from the Palestinian Authority, and reportedly another tens of millions of dollars each month. So those who cry out, why is there no money in Gaza? It's because Hamas is literally pilfering it in order to build its terrorist infrastructure. I want to give you just an example of what that means. By the way, also, until October 6th, 10,000 Gazan workers were coming into Israel every day to work, and they were heavily, 70 or 80% of that was being taxed by Hamas upon their return. I want to give you a sense of what that means as far as their military infrastructure. It's reported that Hamas managed to build 500 kilometers, that's 300 miles, of this tunnel infrastructure that we keep hearing about under the Gaza Strip. And just to give you a sense, these are not, little tunnels that you have to claw through. These are reinforced concrete tunnels, some of them wide enough to bring in cars, rooms. They have electricity, ventilation. These are 50, 60, 70 meters. That's about 150 feet underground in some places, incredibly complex. 1 kilometer of tunnel system in the Gaza Strip uses as much building material or as much money as you would need to build a 3-story medical clinic. So I said 500 kilometers of tunnels. That's 500 three-story medical clinics that could have been built into Gaza. They complain about the lack of water. They have plenty of water. They have an aquifer. They've just completely neglected it and used, again, all of those resources to build an unbelievable amount of rockets. In fact, I may or may not have a rocket siren while I sit here. We've had one every night around this time. And then I will have to excuse myself for a few minutes and run to the bomb shelter, as I've done almost every night for the last month. So imagine if they would have taken this ingenuity, the money, about $10 billion that they put into the tunnel system, the billions of engineering and ingenuity they put into their missile system. They're producing mines. And if they would have put that into the economy. When Israel left in 2005, Israel left behind all of the economic had, and they were destroyed immediately the next day instead of being used to catapult the Palestinian economy. A word about their popularity. Of course, kind of hard to take public opinion polls now, but the last public opinion poll was published in June of this year, 2023, and over half of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank would have voted for Hamas to lead the Palestinian Authority over Mahmoud Abbas and the Fatah. Still relatively popular, even if voices of resistance to Hamas grew over the past years, they would still win a popular election today. What does Hamas want, and why launch this attack now? I'm going to skip the part about how October 7th was so unbelievably shocking for Israel and really for anyone who cares about human rights anywhere in the world. And I won't. We don't have time, at least in this part of the talk, to get into the. I don't know how to do the shock at the moral collapse of those protesting somehow against Israel, especially on campuses around the United States and around Europe. That's a problem you in America will have to deal with, and it's a deep one. But the shock here, not just that they killed, 1,400 Israelis, that's our 9/11. But the brutal manner in which they executed, raped, tortured, burned alive entire families, killed babies. And I'm not even saying the most graphic things that we're still discovering about what was done to these 1,400 people who were killed within the course of a few hours, because that's just how fast it took for the security forces to realize what the hell was happening and get there, is such a shock to our system here in Israel, as we haven't even identified all the bodies because they were mutilated. Some of them were mutilated so badly. I think it's going to be a massive turning point, certainly for Israel's national security outlook. For the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's going to complicate it infinitely, and really for the region. But it should also change things deeply on a level for the entire international community and how terrorist organizations are viewed. Hamas made ISIS look like a humanitarian organization. What they did on October 7th. Into this a little bit more. I'll leave it, suffice it to say, and I've, although I was not a combat soldier, I did do guard duty on the Gaza border one time back in my military service. The Israeli defense establishment fell victim here to what we call a failure of a conceptia, okay, a conceptual failure, a massive paradigm failure to understand who Hamas was and what they wanted. We had the most high-tech fence. We had a system of cameras and security, balloons floating over, and we thought that was enough. Most of our forces were busy doing guard duty and patrols in the West Bank because terror has heated up there. They're already on the northern border. They were not ready for an invasion in the Gaza Strip. And I have to give from a very detached operational perspective, give kudos to Hamas for planning a very complex, very sophisticated terror operation and keeping it secret from absolutely everyone for the last 3 years. That's about how long they took to plan this. They lulled us into complacency. They lulled us into a sense that they were maturing, that they were growing up, that they were becoming maybe some kind of more mainstream, and that with economic incentives and inducements and increased autonomy, that one day that they'll mellow out and become a regular kind of governing institution, similar to how the PLO, which was the main terrorist organization throughout the 70s and 80s, eventually became the Palestinian Authority and doesn't directly fight us today, even if it still doesn't accept our right to exist. And what they did in the last 2 years with allowing Islamic Jihad to instigate rounds of fighting against Israel and sitting back was mistakenly viewed by Israeli everybody, leaders, analysts, almost everybody, that they were not interested in a fight. They were interested in stability, in governance, and economy. And if we allowed more workers, if we allowed more Qatari cash suitcases, expanded fishing rights, then everything would be okay. And I'll say I was one of these people. I was one of these analysts who bought this conception as well. And anybody who said otherwise was called a racist, a warmonger. Turns out they were all right, and everyone else was completely wrong. It was comfortable for Israeli right-wing governments in recent years also to play along with this, again, under this false paradigm of who Hamas was and what they wanted. Why did they launch it now? What was the timing? First of all, they were looking to lull us. The reports are now coming out that they had even thought about doing this on Pesach, and that Iran had asked them to push this back. They are an Iran-backed proxy, not Iran-controlled, but an Iran-backed proxy. And they waited till really to catch us asleep, and that was on the morning of a Shabbat and Simchat Torah, when families were together, when people were at synagogues, and nobody was expecting, masses. The estimates are about 3,000 people, not just Hamas, by the way, random Gazans in flip-flops. You could see them on the videos tagging along in order to join in the massacre and the rape and the kidnapping of Israelis. We essentially fell victim to our own hubris, their sophisticated planning, and our falling victim to this paradigm that everyone had bought into, and it turned out was false. Why now? Because peace was happening throughout the region, and Dr. Ahmed will talk about that a little later. Peace was taking shape, taking place, not overnight. A lot of work to do. That's a lot of what we try to do in Sharaka. But two Gulf governments, Saudi Arabia was expected to sign a peace agreement, a historic peace agreement, possibly by the beginning of 2024. Morocco and Sudan and Africa, many countries who had never openly been able to talk about peace with Israel. And Hamas assessed, and I don't know if they were totally wrong, but at least in the short term, they were right. Hamas assessed that if they conducted a terrorist attack that was so brutal, not 10 people killed on the border, not 100 rockets, not even 1,000 rockets, but such a brutal massacre and humiliation of Israelis, Israel would be forced to do exactly what it's doing now. The death toll on the Palestinian side would be so overwhelming that it would derail all of these peace talks. It would, and then they're incredibly savvy at social media. They stage deaths. They use AI. They're very savvy at creating TikTok videos showing the suffering of the Palestinian people. And emotion plays. People don't look to see if they're real. Someone sent me yesterday of a Syrian soldier executing a Syrian opposition person, claiming it was the Zionists. And we had to explain to this Muslim woman, no, this is in Syria. Actually, this has nothing to do with Israel. Most people don't bother calling their Israeli friend and asking what's real. They want to incite the West Bank. They want to incite where terrorism has been going on for the last couple of years in a more intense way. Jerusalem, Israeli Arabs, Hezbollah, the Houthis, anyone who's backed by Iran. And you see Hezbollah is firing rockets over the northern border. You see the Houthis are even firing occasional missiles at Israel and at U.S. warships in the region. They want to incite massive conflict and war in the region and derail all of this progress. What is Israel going to have to do? It's not popular. Nobody wants to hear it. It's become clear to Israel, I think behind the scenes, and Dr. Ahmed can talk about it from an Arab perspective. I think all of the moderate countries in the region, I think all of the Western countries, there is no substitute now for completely dismantling Hamas. all of its military and political infrastructure, removing it from Gaza. And if that's probably going to entail months of reoccupying militarily the Gaza Strip. And the answer that will have to be in the long term after that is something that I don't know Israel can do, and I hope our new Arab friends in the region will be able to do this. And that is, how do you de-radicalize a society that is so unbelievably and completely radicalized, all the way down to what they're teaching in schools and what they're showing on their televisions? It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. And I'll kind of say one last word here is all of the calls around the world and the pressure on Israel for ceasefire and ceasefire now will, as much as people hate to see civilians dying, we hate to see civilians dying. But what's clear after October 7th, and that was not clear after the previous rounds of fighting, is if this problem is not dealt with to its core, then this is just going to happen again in 1 or 2 years, and it will continue happening every 1 or 2 or 3 years, and Israel will respond, and then the world will cry out for a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons, and we're just going to keep doing this again and again and again. Not ending on such a happy note, I know, but that's because the solution to this problem is not an easy one, and it's going to require a lot of fortitude for Israel, for the governments in the region, and unfortunately for you in the Jewish community, who also have to bear the brunt of massively increasing anti-Semitism whenever anything happens in Israel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Feferman, for those remarks. Really appreciate it. Moving right along, Gina Ligon will give us a perspective that's more U.S. focused. Gina, why don't you take it away from here?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this esteemed panel with my colleagues around the world. I'm actually right down the street from you on UNO's campus, and I'm here to speak to you about how the attack on October 7th has increased anti-Semitism in the United States and what the Department of Homeland Security and our center here at UNO is doing about it. So, I think one of the reasons that Sharon asked me to be on this panel, hi Sharon, thank you for asking me to join, was the horrible, what I would call terrorist attack on your community last week when you received the white powder substance at the JCC. The way academics define terrorism is not only violence, but also the threat of violence. And so to us, that was an act of terrorism. When you got the innocuous, as the World Herald described it, powder sent to you, it wasn't innocuous. It carried fear, and it disrupted day-to-day operations, and it was a terrorist attack. And so I'm here to talk to you about why these events on October 7th have incited this melee of what we call domestic violent extremists here in the United States, who are really capitalizing on the messaging and some of the images that are coming out of the region. And they're not getting to hear people like Dr. Feferman hear the counterpoint of what's happening. And so they're really being inundated by the cyber war that Hamas has started, which is what we're seeing. So one of the first attacks I wanted to talk to you about was what happened at Cornell University last week. So there were, every campus has these message boards all over that are controlled messaging, like, upcoming school holidays or sports events or anything like that, but they all have this coordinated message. What's interesting about them is they're also connected to the Internet of Things, which is something that our center has really been focused on looking at, of how sort of our cyber vulnerabilities of having all of our communication platforms connected to sort of the dirty web or not be secure also has increased the target space for these domestic actors. I won't repeat what was said on those Cornell message boards to Jewish students and Jewish female students, but as a woman working on a college campus, I can tell you that was also terrorism. The threat of violence toward women and people of the Jewish faith was horrible and egregious, and has incited fear in that community and communities like it abroad. So, as Sharon mentioned, I'm an organizational psychologist, and I've devoted my career to really looking at how humans organize to accomplish goals, specifically how humans organize to accomplish violent ideological goals. And so for my time today, I'm going to share with you what happened on October 7th and how it's really incited a lot of violence across the United States and a lot of different types of extremists, which I think has been, really stressful for a lot of us who are in this space to watch, because it has elicited more activity and greater threat across not just white supremacists or anti-Semitic extremists, but also anti-government extremists, also what we call homegrown violent extremists, which are individuals who are inspired by a foreign terrorist ideology from abroad. They are all being targeted by Hamas's messaging about this, and really it's allowing them to kind of justify their violence, particularly with the target of the Jewish community. So just in case people don't know exactly what NCITE is, we were designated in 2020 by the Department of Homeland Security to be an academic consortium here at University of Nebraska at Omaha, but we are also funding 27 universities across the United States and 3 in other countries to study terrorism and targeted violence against the United States specifically. We have this small and consistent funding from the federal government from 2020 till 2030 to do this work. And so we are here to stay, and we want to be a resource for you and this community specifically. So, we've spent a lot of time since October 7th talking to some national audiences. So we hosted the head of counterterrorism, the counterterrorism undersecretary, Samantha Vinograd. Her father is actually a Holocaust survivor. We hosted her to speak about what DHS is doing to protect faith-based communities. That recording is videoed on our website. You can watch that. She was very inspiring to me to have her on. We also last week hosted Rebecca Weiner, who is the head of counterterrorism intelligence for the New York Police Department. And she really talked about the threat landscape. And I'm going to share with you some snippets of what she said last week. But today, I'm talking to my community. I'm talking to people here in Omaha, and feel like this is just as important of a mission as some of those national audiences, because they put our center here. So we need to protect our community with as much vigor and kind of outreach as possible. So in 2021, I worked with the Biden administration to craft the country's first ever domestic violent extremism strategy. And there hadn't been one before then. There was a counterterrorism strategy looking at terrorism abroad, but nothing about domestic violent extremists here in the United States. In this document, one of the things we did is we outlined the most prevalent types of domestic violent extremism in the U.S. And the one that we found to be the most lethal and persistent threat were those called RIMV, racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, or white supremacists with anti-Semitic ideology. And a hallmark of that particular ideology is denigration of people of color, but also a lot of anti-Semitism associated with that. We have some of the very best researchers in our consortium who are studying this and trying to understand how they recruit, how they organize, what kind of messaging they are resonating with, to really just kind of deconstruct that movement and understand what we can do to prevent it here in the U.S. The second type of domestic violent extremism that I think is relevant to the October 7th attack are something called AGAVE, and that stands for anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists. And these are usually people who, a lot of times we think of them as sovereign citizens, people who are against any form of federal or state or local government. So they're anti-police, they're anti-judiciary, and really wanting to overthrow the current government structure. There's also the anti-authority part of AGAVE, and these are people that are anti-capitalism. So you saw a lot of that with some of the riots and protests that happened in 2020 as well. And so they lump those two together because they're sort of anti authority, whether that be government or a capitalist authority. And then we have other types of domestic terrorism or targeted violence in the U.S. Some of them that we study here are something called incels, involuntary celibates. So these are individuals who their ideology is against women. We saw that with the yoga studio in Florida, where the man went and shot trying to kill women because of his unrequited advances toward them. Another type of extremism that you can expect from U.S. persons that you've probably heard a bit about is something called homegrown violent extremism. So this isn't necessarily classified as domestic terrorism, but it is a U.S. person who's inspired to commit an atrocity against the U.S. and they're on U.S. soil. So these are people who are inspired by a foreign terrorist organization. So you saw a lot of this most recently with the people who were inspired by ISIS. You also saw some people who've been inspired by Al-Shabaab and different groups in sort of the Al-Qaeda milieu. When you look across all these threats to America and how they are picking up on the rhetoric that's happening with Hamas's atrocity, a lot of their narrative is based on this very black and white dichotomy between the oppressed and the oppressors. And so with the RINV groups, they talk a lot about that the white person in America is being oppressed by people of color and minorities that are trying to replace whites in America. When you talk about anti-government, they talk about the government is trying to oppress them. A lot of the narratives there. Homegrown violent extremists, a lot of them are talking about how the West oppresses Muslims here and abroad. So when you see the narrative coming out of Palestine specifically, and with Hamas, they have really done a masterful job, unfortunately, of painting Israel into that category of the oppressor. And so what they are calling on with all of these the rhetoric and the propaganda that they're sending out to these three really different groups. So you've got white supremacists, anti-government, and foreign terrorists inspired. You have them all coalescing around symbols of Israel. So here we think of American Jewish population, because they are perceiving, based on this messaging that Hamas is sending out, us to be part of the oppressed, right? Or the oppressors. And so whatever ideology they have, Hamas has done a master class at really being able to shape Israel as the oppressor in this case. The other piece that I think is, really interesting is this idea of the threat landscape heating up. I think that when we had Rebecca Weiner on last week from NYPD, she said, you've got all three of individuals who we've been concerned about in these groups, racists, skinheads, you've got anti-government, you've got homegrown violent extremists, even some of the eco-terrorists that they watch are talking about this conflict in what's happening in Israel and Gaza right now. So the message war has been really sophisticated at turning people against people of the Jewish faith, both home and abroad. So with that call to arms, what can we do to protect ourselves here at home? And so there are, a lot of us here in our center, we want one message we want to give. I see Ronnie Ryder-Pahlman is on. Ronnie is in the center here at NCITE. She does research with us. We want you to know that you are not alone. There's three specific things that we think are important for people of the Jewish faith in America to be doing right now. One is to consolidate resources about what you can do to protect yourself in your place of worship. And any place where people of the Jewish faith gather, right? So JCC is one of them. We did make a handout of federal resources. I think Erin's going to talk about it at the end for different faith-based communities to be able to share. But there's so many local organizations and law enforcement here. I saw the press conference you did with FBI with the special agent in charge, Eugene Cowell. That's an incredibly important relationship for everybody who's leading these organizations to be involved with. And to make sure that you are at this, you're not calling people when you're under distress. You're building those relationships right now so that you can reach out to them and know exactly when and how to report if you feel unsafe in your community. The second thing that I wanted to share is just, terrorism is a tool of the weak. They are trying to change your daily course of life through their threat of fear. And so continuing your day-to-day activities, continuing these gatherings like this is a wonderful way to be able to, shore up your resources and to fight against what they're trying to accomplish. And then the last piece, I think, is to know you're not alone. So one of the really wonderful things of our center is we have something called a cooperative agreement with the federal government. And I have a 17-member board of people in Washington, D.C. who are all part of the counterterrorism kind of apparatus. And last week, I had a phone call with the head of the domestic terrorism branch for Department of Homeland Security. And they've increased their shifts. So they are now on 3 8-hour shifts. So they're on 24-hour shifts watching and warning state and local law enforcement. You see that with FBI as well. When you see Christopher Wray speak publicly about this, it's quieter, but the government has your back. And we are very much trying to protect places of worship right now in a way that I haven't seen in my career happen here in the United States. And it makes me really proud to be part of it and to feel like I'm helping in some way. So just to make sure we have time for our third speaker, because he's amazing, I'll just close by reminding you how I started today. Americans who have no clear tie to Hamas or Palestinians are being galvanized by this war of ideas that's happening online right now. And I'm very concerned about what it means for the narrative about oppressors versus oppressed and how they're using that to galvanize people that we wouldn't expect to be targeting people of the Jewish faith. I wanted to share that people in our consortium are in a full court press to study how to break down that particular narrative and what are some weaknesses of it to try to help solve this problem with you. I'm really hopeful that our center can continue to engage with you. We're here for the public good and to be able to host these events, host you in our space, talk to you about what we can do to help. I feel really honored to be part of the fight. So thank you for having me today. And I will turn it over to Erin Grace to introduce our last speaker.
Thank you, Gina. Okay, so Dr. Ahmed Khuzaie, I don't want to waste my time talking, but if you are ready to give your remarks, we look forward to hearing from you.
Of course. Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting all of you today. Before I start, I would like to just say that it is with a heavy heart I'm extending my deepest condolences for the fallen souls in Israel, some of whom are friends I made over the past few years, and I pray for the abductees' safe return. Our hearts and minds and prayers are with you. I'll start with a bit of pieces of what Dan started talking about, which is Sharaka, where I work under Dan, who's our executive director in it. Now, Sharaka in Arabic means partnership. It was established right after where the Abraham Accords were established or were signed, and for the first time, equally between Israelis, Bahrainis, Emiratis, Moroccans, the Abraham Accords countries. Now, when I say it's the only one of its kind, I'm talking about a different concept here. Now, there are many NGOs that exist today talking about the Israeli narrative on its own, where with Sharaka, it's equally mutually ran. We come from different cultures. And when I say different cultures, it was really difficult for us to work together in the beginning, where Israelis are straightforward, hardworking. They work 24 hours, literally. And us in the Gulf, we are more laid back, more not used to that kind of work. So it was not easy to bridge the gap between the cultures in the initial stages. And that was important for us to understand each other. When we say that Israel is part of the Middle East, it is on many levels, but when it comes to professionality, when it comes to work, many other values, it's actually not. They know how to get the job done, and that's something we need to learn. So back to Sharaka, how it started was started equally between Israeli and Emirati, and then we started joining in. Now, I come from a place, from a Bahrain, basically it's an island of the coast of eastern Saudi Arabia. So it's an Arab land. How we were taught about what the Jews and what the Israelis are, even though we host the only indigenous Jewish community in the Gulf. Today, we're talking about 37 locals remaining. But nevertheless, we were taught to hate the Jews, mainly in Israel. We were given a narrative. We were spoon-fed all of how Israel, how the Jews are. Now, to change that after 75 years was not an easy job to do. Even if I consider myself as well-versed, well-traveled, I studied, I have many Jewish friends, it was difficult for me to travel to Israel for the first time. I expected something different. I expected an open-air kind of bunker. What I was faced with was something completely different. What I expected to be faced with hate, maybe, although it was, but not from the Jews, it was from the Arabs, for another context. Now, it has been a challenge for us as Arabs and Muslims to stand to our communities as well. To state the truth to our people is not something that's easy to do, and not what it looks like. How Israelis are not the demons we were told are, how Israel is not an apartheid state, and how Israeli Arabs have more rights as an Arab than an Arab in an Arab and Muslim country. Just to give you an example, if an Arab could get about $10,000, for example, as a surgeon in Israel, in an Arab country, he would get maximum of $300. And when I say an Arab country, I'm talking about the likes of Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the Gulf, it's got to be just a bit different. Now, to stand up for that and to build what a partnership is, was to educate our people. And that was still not an easy thing to do. I mean, it started all with my colleague, Fatima, who could not be with us tonight, sadly. But she was the bravest person I have ever met in my entire life. She's younger than me, and she decided to change her community by joining Sharaka. Now, when I joined, we became only two. And we still do receive threats. Most of them are empty threats, but that won't force us to back down now. When it started just me and Fatima. Today, we're talking about 3 years later, a community that we established of 80 people. Maybe that doesn't sound big, but for a country with 1.5 million as a population, it's still a big place to be. Now, we still are optimistic about how we can change all of that, how we can change the narrative, and as well be able to expand our operations, which has not been easy. We are still optimistic because we have been expanding. I mean, despite all of that, we have been promoting the projects. We have been promoting how coexistence could be the way forward. We have promoted that through programs. We have the latest is our Holocaust program, where we have taken Arabs, educators, influencers, Bahrainis, Saudis, and even others. We have taken them around basically to see Israel firsthand, to Poland as well for the Holocaust, just to show that whatever happened all of those years ago could happen again, not just to Jews, even to others. Now, the question of the Abraham Accords and the Abraham Accords countries, the newly found friends of Israel, and how those countries could stand or have they stood for the new family friendship with Israel, condemning Hamas. Now, the situation in the Accords countries is not as bright and shiny as it seems. We are fighting our own demons here. For our countries to come out and call things for what they really are could come at a high cost for us, especially for the monarchies here in the Gulf. On one hand, the Brotherhood representing the Sunni side, as Dan mentioned earlier, they are controlling a big portion of the communities through handouts. And through those handouts, it starts with just voting for them in elections. And after 2 or 3 or even 4 generations later, they believe in their creed. So if our government stands up today and say that Hamas are terrorists, in some countries, that will cause a big discourse that the monarchies are not really looking forward to. Now, when it comes to the Shia, the other side of Muslims here, who are normally following the teachings of the Ayatollahs, who are in Iran, which makes it even a bigger threat that have been growing over the past few years. Now, both groups are creating instability for us. An example of that is that they don't see eye to eye, the Shiites and the Sunnis. Yet, when the question of Palestine comes into on the field, you see them coming hand in hand against the local government. So they don't want to see them forming that. Yet, it is happening. It's in the pipeline behind closed doors, where Emirates have already, a couple of years back, condemned the Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, Hamas being part of that. The rest of the Accords countries are trying to do that. Not an easy job to do, but it will happen. Now, Dan as well mentioned Saudi Arabia, and negotiations were underway, and they were coming to form something, but it did not happen. Now, when Saudi was on the verge of joining the Accords, they were planning even to lead it, not just to join it. They were just a bit away from putting a proposal to put an end to the Palestinian issue. Iran saw itself out of that. Part of the Iranian constitution is to free Palestine and to annihilate Israel. If Saudi Arabia joins the Accords, put an end to that, or just the beginning of the end to that, where would that leave Iran between the Middle East and its own people? Where would all that wealth go? They won't have a way to do it. And that was the right time for Hamas to attack, to sabotage all of those plans on one hand, as well to create a new big problem for everybody. I mean, nobody's talking about the Accords anymore, which makes our job even harder. It's not the end, yet it's not an easy way. Now, the way forward is to dismantle Hamas. There's no way around it. Maybe replace it with a multinational force, as Secretary Blinken just proposed a few days ago, to make sure terrorists won't take charge again, not only against Israel, but as well to give breathing chance for the Palestinians for the first time in their lives to decide what they want. Last Thursday, a statement came out from our parliament in Bahrain saying that the ties between the countries are endangered or on hold. It's safe to say that it was misinterpreted, and the translation that went out was not proper. Now, the parliament, to start with, in Bahrain, is not concerned about the international affairs of the country. It's only the foreign ministry and the king. Now, what the statement in Arabic came out was them confirming that the Israeli ambassador is not in the country, and that the Bahraini ambassador is not in Israel anymore, and the economic ties are on hold. That was the statement. I think it was a proper maneuver to calm the crowds down who are taken to the streets, taking the sides of Hamas. In reality, yes, for security reasons, the Israeli ambassador is in Israel, and the Bahraini one is back in Bahrain. But that was not as a diplomatic withdrawal. It was not backing down on the accords as the Hamas and the Axis are viewing it or promoting it. It's just a temporary thing until things calm down. I spoke to an official 2 days ago who confirmed that it's just on hold since everything in Israel is on hold to face the threats right now. And I won't take much longer. I think there's one last thing that me and Dan could share talking about. I'll just start with it and then hand it over to Dan, which is about the hostages. If the Abraham Accords countries could play a role in releasing the hostages. They are, it's a bit minimal until now, since the Hamas are following the teachings of the Brotherhood. They are not part of anything related to the Emirates. They are not anything related to Bahrain, but they are dealing with it through Qatar. So Saudi is leading that through Qatar, especially that Iran have closer ties with Iran that are also the closest to in the Gulf is Qatar. So it's safe to say that Saudi Arabia is leading that, and I'll end my notes with this. I'll hand it back to Dan.
Thank you, Ahmed. Yeah, I'll just say, you know, we're in a different Middle East than we were prior to 3 years ago with the Abraham Accords, and we hope we're actually working on a policy paper now. We hope that the long-term solution has to be the complete removal of Hamas and a re-education, much like Nazi Germany had to be denazified, much like Imperial Japan had to go these processes. Israel will not be able to do it, and it's going to fall, I think, and I hope, to the new regional leaderships of Saudi Arabia, backed by the other Gulf states, with Egypt, in order to do this, in order to revamp the entire Palestinian leadership. It's rotten to the core with extreme anti-Semitism, glorification of violence and terrorism, and this permeates the entire society. Israel can defeat them militarily, but I don't know if that's the long-term solution. The long-term solution is going to be what I hope and I believe could be an Abraham Accords type approach. And the Saudis and the Emiratis and others do have the experience in rooting out from a deep societal place, rooting out radicalism, Islamic radicalism in their societies. And that is the long-term solution we can see here going forward. And they're, like Ahmed said, they're going to be the ones who help, if it's possible, to get the hostages out, to help broker that agreement.
Well, we're about at time, and we didn't get to a single one of our audience questions. I'm really sorry. I'm wondering if each of you could just give 30 seconds, like final words, something you wish you would have said or wanted to say to this audience. And then I'll stick around if anyone wants to chat, and I can give you some stuff that I brought and answer any questions. So Dan, why don't we start with you? What final thought would you like to leave everyone with?
If I can go last, that'll give me a second.
All right. Well, then let's go Omaha first, and then we'll span the lens. Gina?
Hi, I think I would just like to leave everyone hopefully with a message of hope. I think right now, you know, the more we can shore ourselves and protect ourselves against some of the dehumanizing language that we're hearing, I think the better. I think you know, making sure this panel for sure seemed very factual and apolitical and as balanced as possible. I wish the message could get out of what like Dan shared about, you know, what Hamas's goals have always been. So to me, I'm grateful to be involved in community events like this, and just know you're not alone, and to stay strong and hopeful. Thanks.
Thank you. Ahmed, how about you?
I would extend her words as well. It's another message of hope. It's not an easy road to take. And when we're talking about the Accords, from day one, we knew it was going to be a hard one to take. It is the road less traveled, and it is going to make a huge difference. I just want to tell you that you are not alone, and I know that we are not as well. We make one friend at a time along the road. Today, Israel has Bahrain, has Emirates, has Morocco. Tomorrow is going to be Saudi, Oman, maybe Kuwait and Qatar, maybe Malaysia, maybe Libya. It's extending. It just requires time and patience. Again, you have new friends. We're not leaving anybody behind. It's a long road, but we're walking it together.
Thank you.
I'll add, Israel for a long time held off on doing what needs to be done. The region held off on doing what needs to be done. The United States and the European powers held off on doing what needs to be done, even though everyone recognizes, or maybe they didn't, who Hamas was. And just like ISIS was rooted out, this is not going to be easy. It's going to be brutal, and Hamas makes it look 10 times more brutal and tries to tug at the heartstrings and play off of people who really don't understand what's actually happening in the region, and then shift all the blame. It's going to require fortitude. Here in Israel, we are ready for this. Know that we are ready. We are resilient. We stand together with the Jewish communities around the world, and you guys are going to have to be resilient as well in facing anti-Semitism, in facing a lot of misguided people who think they mean well when they protest against Israel or they call for ceasefires. A lot of people who don't mean well, who chant Intifada in the streets of America. We will win this together, because at the end of the day, those who are fighting for things that are good will win the day. We just have to be a lot more resolute in this and clear-headed. I will put in a shameless pitch for what we're doing in Sharaka. We are a nonprofit, and if what we're trying to do as far as bringing educational delegations to Israel, speaking tours, which we're going to be doing across the United States now in the coming months, with people like Ahmed and from the other Arab countries, to help educate different publics about what's happening, and people like Ahmed who will strongly condemn Hamas and the radical access. We invite you to support our efforts, and you can contact me privately if that is something that interests you. And we'll be speaking in a lot of the major areas around the United States over the next few months. And this is something where the civilized world has to come together, and we are, and we will, and we have to overlook the propaganda. We have to overlook the radicalism, and we have to be strong in what we believe in for a better future for all of us. And I'm convinced that we will do that.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to close out the online portion of this, the in-person audience. I'm here to answer any questions you may have, but don't mistake me for an expert. I want to thank our panelists for coming today. Thanks to the Jewish Center. For those of you,
Yeah.
sorry,
Thank you for having us, and take care, everybody.